Hi everybody, and welcome back to Lost Genre Mother-in-Law Stories. And just like the title suggests, these are stories about mothers-in-law. We're going to kick off this video with an in-law top 10. Number 1. At our first meeting, the very first words said to me by my future father-in-law were, "Don't you put any airs and graces with us and we'll be fine." My future mother-in-law asked if I was the girl who called for dear husband last weekend, knowing full well I was with him at the time. This was my first introduction to her, now constant, stirring. Number 2. A year before we married, we attended a friend's wedding. At the reception, mother-in-law asked me why I wanted a big church wedding. Why did I want bridesmaids? Why didn't I just elope? And she advised me on how I should sell my wedding dress after to make some money. All out of dear husband's earshot, of course. Number 3. We visited several properties looking for our first home. My future in-laws found the agent's details and drove around to look at them the day after us without us knowing. Fortunately, we chose the one they absolutely hated and are still living there quite happily. Number 4. When we first got together, future dear husband bought me a pair of yoga pants for the pricely sum of £19. Mother-in-law went on and on about him extravagantly wasting money on me. Number 5. Whenever we go on holiday, mother-in-law and father-in-law book a trip to the same place shortly afterwards to see what it's like, and usually return with a list of faults. Destinations are now a closely guarded secret. Number 6. Mother-in-law refused to give us a list of names and addresses of her family and friends so we could send them wedding invitations. She said none of them would want to travel all that way for our wedding in my hometown, approximately 100 miles away from dear husband's home. We just used Facebook to contact them and get their addresses. They all came. Number 7. Constantly trying to stir things up between us, mother-in-law appeared on our doorstep one Sunday morning with the words, "Didn't dear husband tell you we were coming?" No, he hadn't, because he didn't know. Also, every time I've seen her, she's told me how he used to go home and tell her he absolutely hated living in our flat. Again, something else she's dreamed up. Number 8. We had settled on who should sign our marriage certificate as witnesses, my bridesmaids, the best man, and my dad. As we gathered around the register with the vicar, she barged to the front, whipped out her glasses and peered over my shoulder and asked, "What's this then?" So, the result of us not wanting to cause a scene in the middle of our wedding ceremony, we have a certificate also signed by mother-in-law. Number 9. Some mothers-in-law treasure their son or daughter. Mine does the opposite. We attended her sister's funeral last year. As dear husband is an only son, I insisted that we went as support for her. While he was speaking to a relative whom he hadn't seen for a long time, mother-in-law informed those gathered that, "No, he hasn't changed much, just cut his hair and got fat." Obviously, this was not the time or place to argue, so we left shortly afterwards. She has learned since that I will not tolerate her insulting my dear husband. And number 10. Last year, I suffered an ectopic pregnancy. It was completely unplanned and unknown about until a week after I was admitted. On returning home, mother-in-law visited to help with the housework. During the day, I mentioned how much weight I had lost. She replied, "Well, you weren't thin, were you?" Incidentally, that was the only comment she has ever made about what was, after all, the loss of her grandchild. When I was admitted to hospital, dear husband called to tell her what was happening. She said that, of course, he must go to them for his dinner every night if I was away. Most of these are pretty small and petty things. Some are quite funny, but put together, they add up to the reason I haven't seen or spoken to mother-in-law for 6 months. I've simply had enough. Fortunately, I am blessed with the most caring, considerate man who is totally on my side. What an obnoxious woman. I mean, On number 8, where she says she peered over her shoulder to sign the wedding certificate, maybe the bride should have turned around and accidentally elbowed her nose when she asked, "What's this then?" That would have been a clear message to the mother-in-law not to mess with this woman again. But then again, they didn't want to make a scene in the middle of the wedding. Okay, and on that note, let's move on to the next story. The worst mistake I ever made was agreeing to live with my in-laws so that my husband and I could save up to buy a house. The second worst mistake I ever made was buying a house the next town over. I should have known better, but of course, being the codependent that I am, I just had to please my husband, who is completely linked to his entire dysfunctional family. My mother-in-law is the neediest person I have ever met. And, as if that wasn't bad enough, I have a brother-in-law that is an alcoholic and an ex-addict. He is totally narcissistic. He is rude, crude, vulgar, annoying, and disgusting. And of course, his mother thinks he's perfect. So, guess who's the good boy who gets to be the family doormat and make up for all his brother's inadequacies? My husband, of course. So, where does that leave me? I'm enemy number 1. I believe that she feels it is her job to reprogram me. I am too threatening to her. 1, I'm educated. 2, I can see right through her. And 3, I think my brother-in-law is a loser and she knows it. I've been with my husband for 10 years and she still cannot say hello to me when we enter her home. It's always the same. The children excitedly walk in first and she greets them cheerfully. Then she looks past me, as I am always behind them, and says a cheerful hello to her son. Then, after we all walk in and are standing together in one room, she'll say, "Hello, how are you?" with an obvious "I couldn't care less" attitude. She is completely intrusive. She actually showed up at one of our apartments while I was at work, of course, with a bucket, rags, and bleach and cleaned my bathroom. Of course, the good boy let her do it. She needs to feel needed, and that is his job. When we lived with her, she came into our room every day to position the blinds the way she wanted them. After a week of this, I told her that I wanted the blinds a certain way to block out the sun in the morning. A few days later, after strolling in the backyard with her doormat, my husband, she stormed in while he was downstairs and quickly repositioned the blinds, stating, "My son and I discussed it and we want the blinds this way." When I later asked him about it, he said they had never even talked about the blinds. Her worst violation was when she snatched my newborn infant out of my arms as if to say, "Give it to me, you're not doing it right." After 3 of these violations, I went to my husband. He brought my baby back to me and gently explained to her, because she's so fragile, not to do that. She also walked in on me and my husband in bed on a couple of occasions when he was still living at home. Her closet was in his room and she couldn't give it up. He had the closet in the hallway. She is hurtful and malicious. My father died about 3 weeks before Christmas. A few days before Christmas, while we were living there, I was sitting in the living room. She walked in saying, "Oh, it's almost Christmas and I'm so depressed." I responded, "I know what you mean." She said in her indignant witch voice, Why are you so depressed about?" I just looked at her in disbelief and whispered, "My father died." And her response to that was, "What difference does that make? You wouldn't have talked to him." I stated, "The difference is he would be alive." To which she replied, "Oh, what? You would have sent him a card or something?" The shame of it is that anyone who really knew anything about me knew how I felt about my father. This woman is the evil dead, and my brother-in-law makes Damien look like a saint. I could go on and on and on, but it almost seems pointless. The sad part of it is they are only a 10-minute drive away. She has been forced to back off, and this is at the expense of my relationship with my husband. But it is a psychological mind game to this day. We pretend we're really busy with all sorts of plans. We have to be careful of what the plan is, or she, or the leeching 40-year-old no-life having brother-in-law will find a way to include themselves. I'm getting a headache just thinking about it. What I'd like to do is move far away, but then they'll just make excuses to come over and spend the night because the drive will be too far. I know I can't expect my husband to cut off his family completely, but I can't help but feel like that is really the answer to all my problems. I love my husband, but the thought of peace of mind seems only like a fantasy. I am determined to make it a reality, but I am beginning to feel numb to everything. Hang in there, OP, and try to open your husband's eyes and to make him stop being a doormat. Maybe some counseling can help. Maybe then he'll realize that going no contact will be the answer and maybe even improve the relationship between the two of you. What a hateful woman. I have to say that when OP was describing that part about Christmas, and her mourning her dad or being sad about her dad, and this woman that I would use a word but I can't say or, I'd be censored, just comes in and gives her grief, like, oh my god, I would have punched her in the face. Or maybe a more pacifist solution would have been to just leave the room, but get away from that toxicity. What do you guys think? How do you think OP should handle this with her husband to try to open his eyes to going no contact? If you have any ideas, just put them down on the comment section. Alright, on that note, let's move on to the third and final story. I met my mother-in-law when I was 15 years old. My husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, was 17. My mother-in-law and her family treated me like the daughter that they never had. When he was 22, my boyfriend moved to another city that was 4 hours away because of his job. After he moved, I felt like my mother-in-law and some of her sisters-in-law treated me differently. I also doubted myself and thought that I was being too emotional about the situation. My mother-in-law planned a 50th anniversary for my father-in-law's parents. At the time, my mother-in-law strictly stated that the only people who could come to this anniversary celebration would be family members. And because she didn't want my brother-in-law's girlfriend, who was also the mother of our niece, to come to the anniversary ceremony, then she thought it would be best not to have me come also, in order to not hurt this girl's feelings. I understood completely, and it wasn't a problem for me. However, what really bothered me, and has bothered me for the last 4 to 5 years, is that 2 weeks before the party, she did invite that other girl to the anniversary celebration. The other girl told me about it. I wasn't upset because I was sure that my mother-in-law would soon ask me, and she did ask me, at 11:30 p.m. the night before the party. She told me that if I could find a pink dress in time, then it was okay for me to come. Mind you, everyone else was wearing the same color and style of pink dress. Also, obviously, at 11:30 p.m., all the department stores were closed. We had to be at the church at 9 a.m. and the shops don't open until 9 a.m. I was extremely hurt and I expressed my feelings to her. She felt that because she had planned the party on her own and was extremely stressed out about the burden of planning it on her own, I should understand how easily her asking me to come had slipped her mind. However, I mentioned that she didn't forget to invite the other girl, the one that she didn't want to come in the first place. I think that she was annoyed that I spoke up for myself. Upon expressing my feelings, she and her sisters-in-law ganged up and treated me extremely badly at family gatherings over the next few years. They would either totally ignore me or slam stuff down when I was around. I couldn't handle it. It was only tolerable because my husband lived in another city and I rarely saw any of his family during the year, except for Christmas and Thanksgiving. My husband told me that it was between me and his mom and that he wasn't going to get involved because he loved us both. It was getting to me because other family members, who really still liked me, told me that his mom was talking about me all the time in negative ways. I'd had it. I was about to dump my boyfriend at the time. On Christmas Eve that year, he proposed before I could dump him. I said yes because I was and still am in love with him. My mother-in-law spent a lot of money on our wedding and helped plan it. I guess she was trying, so things were going well. I moved to where my husband lived. When my mother-in-law and father-in-law came over, she would make comments about the place we lived and about how my forks, spoons, and plates were arranged. Then she would arrange it her way, and I would rearrange it my way soon after. I rarely had to see his family because we lived 4 hours away, so I would grin and tolerate it. One weekend, both my mom and my sister and his mom and dad came to our home. My mom and sister and I went out of the house because I was stressed because of my mother-in-law. We came back shortly. When we were coming back into my home, my husband, mother-in-law, and father-in-law were on their way out. I asked my hubby where he was going, and he said that his parents were taking him out to eat. He said that we weren't invited. I was so upset. My mother-in-law and father-in-law decided to stay at a hotel that night. That was a good thing. I met her over 10 years ago. I am having difficulty going to my mother-in-law's home without letting all of the past memories and heartfelt times come back. Still, to this date, she does and says things when people aren't around. She jabs indirectly, but I get what she means. I think now it's starting to affect my marriage and I can't handle it any longer. She still goes to hug me and stuff, but I just don't want to get hurt again and put up a wall. I vowed that nothing would ruin my marriage, and I won't let her ruin it because I am sure that's what she wants. Lately, she plays the nice, sweet mother-in-law, while I'm still the bitter daughter-in-law, so I look like the bad guy. It's not easy for me to fake that I like someone, and I guess I do look like the bad guy. I am nice to her when she is nice to me, but I ignore her when she starts up her crap. In my opinion, OP, you need to talk to your husband. The fact that he said that it's between you and her and he's not gonna get in the middle because he loves you both is BS. He is married to you, so he should defend you. That's just a cop-out on his behalf because he's probably just a mommy's boy or something of the sort. And that thing that happened that his parents took him out to dinner and you guys weren't invited, that was incredibly rude of them, and he should have stood up for you guys and say, no, my wife, her mom, and my sister-in-law are coming to dinner with us. That should have been him. But like I usually say, that's just my opinion. What do you guys think? Do you think OP should talk to her husband or try to handle this situation in another way? And here we are again at the end of the video. So, like I usually do, if you guys like the video, I'd like to invite you to press like. And if you did do that and you still haven't subscribed, then go ahead and click subscribe and become a part of this community. Also, don't forget to visit the Lost Genre subreddit, there's a link in the description, where you can cross-post stories you'd like for me to feature in any videos, or if you'd like to share your story, that's where you can write it down for me to use. Alright, and having said all that, I'll see you guys on the next video.